The private academy in Connecticut woke slowly beneath a pale autumn sky, its stone walls glowing faintly as staff prepared for Founders' Day. Polished floors reflected chandeliers, and the smell of lemon cleaner mixed with old books and fresh flowers. In the main hall, an easel stood draped in deep blue velvet, positioned carefully beneath the grand staircase. Today, a new portrait would be unveiled, one honoring the woman whose donations had rescued the school from financial collapse. Teachers whispered as they passed. Students paused, curious. Few of them truly knew who Eleanor Whitmore was. They only knew her name appeared on buildings, scholarships and plaques, spoken with quiet respect. Frank Miller stood near the back of the hall, his janitor's cart beside him, fingers wrapped tightly around a worn rag. At 62, Frank had mastered the art of being unnoticed. He arrived before sunrise, left after dark, and spent his days cleaning up traces of other people's importance. Normally portraits meant nothing to him, but when the velvet cloth slipped away, his breath caught. The woman in the painting looked calm and composed, dressed in a navy blazer with a small gold pin near the lapel. Her eyes held a steady intelligence, but it was something deeper, something painfully familiar that made Frank's knees weaken. A faint scar rested near her eyebrow. He had seen that scar under flickering fluorescent lights decades ago. "Ma'am," he whispered, his voice barely sound. "The girl lived with me in the orphanage." No one heard him at first. Applause filled the hall as the headmaster stepped forward, speaking about generosity and legacy. Frank's ears rang. The hall around him blurred, replaced by memories he had buried deep. Cold dormitory rooms, iron-framed beds, a little girl sitting on a windowsill hugging her knees, staring at the night sky through cracked glass. Ellie, that was what everyone called her. She was small for her age, stubbornly quiet, but her eyes always watched, always learning. Frank had been just a few years older than her then, old enough to sneak extra bread, old enough to take blame when younger kids broke rules. He remembered wrapping his jacket around her shoulders during winter inspections, whispering jokes so she wouldn't cry. He remembered the night she asked him, in a voice too serious for a child, whether people like them ever escaped places like that. "You will," he'd told her. "You're too smart not to." The plaque beneath the portrait came into focus. Eleanor Whitmore, principal benefactor. Frank's hands trembled. The orphanage records had burned in a fire years later. Children scattered, names erased. Ellie was taken away one night by strangers who promised a better life. Frank never knew where she went. He assumed she had forgotten him, forgotten all of them. Most people did. A teacher beside him frowned. "Frank, are you all right?" He nodded quickly, stepping back into the shadows. The ceremony continued, words. That night, long after the applause faded and the academy settled into its usual silence, Frank found himself standing alone in the main hall. The lights were dimmed, leaving soft reflections on the polished floor. His cleaning cart rested nearby, untouched. He stared at the portrait again, closer now, studying every detail as if the painting might suddenly speak. There was no doubt left in his mind. The shape of her mouth, the calm strength in her gaze. This was Ellie. Time had refined her, dressed her in confidence and wealth. But it had not erased the girl he once knew. Frank let out a slow breath, his chest tight with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He remembered the orphanage fire like it was yesterday. The smell of smoke, children crying, staff shouting orders no one could hear. Records were lost, names burned, and whatever future those papers might have proven vanished into ash. After that night, life moved on for everyone else. For Frank, it simply became quieter. The next morning, Frank was called into the headmaster's office. He stood awkwardly on the edge of the leather chair, cap clutched in his hands, while the headmaster studied him over folded fingers. "You said something yesterday," the man began carefully. "About Miss Whitmore." Frank nodded. "I'm sure it was her. We grew up together. Same orphanage. Same room." The headmaster sighed, not unkindly. "Miss Whitmore is very private. She built her life far from here, but she's arriving this afternoon for a brief visit. If you're mistaken, it could be embarrassing." "I won't be mistaken," Frank said quietly. A black sedan rolled through the academy gates that afternoon, smooth and silent as it stopped near the courtyard steps. Administrators straightened their jackets. Phones appeared. Eleanor Whitmore stepped out, composed and elegant, greeting everyone with polite smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. Frank watched from a distance, his pulse racing. As Eleanor turned toward the building, her gaze drifted past the welcoming committee. For a brief second, confusion crossed her face. Then her eyes widened. Everything else seemed to disappear. "Frank," she said, her voice barely louder than the rustle of leaves. He didn't move. He couldn't. Years of doubt, of believing he had been erased from her life, weighed him down. "Ellie," he replied, the name escaping before he could stop himself. The world rushed back in. Eleanor stepped forward, ignoring the stunned administrators, her expression breaking into something raw and unguarded. "They told me you disappeared after the fire," she said. "I looked for you. I never stopped." "I thought you forgot," Frank admitted. "People usually do." She shook her head. "I remembered everything. You kept me alive in that place." Tears filled Frank's eyes as the distance between them vanished. In that moment, the benefactor and the janitor ceased to exist. There were only two children from an orphanage, standing face to face after. That evening, the academy gathered once more in the main hall. But the atmosphere had shifted. The formal stiffness of the morning was gone, replaced by a quiet anticipation. Word had spread among the staff that something unexpected had happened, though no one could quite explain what it meant. Frank stood near the wall, uncertain whether he belonged there at all. Eleanor Whitmore took the stage beneath her portrait, the painting glowing softly under the lights. She paused before speaking, her eyes scanning the room until they found Frank. For a moment, the confidence people admired so much gave way to something deeply personal. "Before we talk about buildings, donations, or names on plaques," she began, "I need to talk about people." The room fell silent. "When I was a child," Eleanor continued, "I lived in a place where no one expected much from us. We were taught to be quiet, grateful, and invisible." Her voice remained steady, but emotion lingered beneath it. "But there was one person who refused to let me believe I was nothing." She turned and gestured gently. "Frank Miller." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Frank felt every eye land on him. Slowly he stepped forward, his hands trembling. He had spent a lifetime avoiding attention. Now it wrapped around him like a spotlight. "This man shared his food with hungry kids, stood between us and cruelty, and told me I mattered when the world said I didn't," Eleanor said. "If I stand here today, it's because someone once chose kindness when he had nothing to gain." Frank swallowed hard, unable to speak. Eleanor took a breath and went on. "I didn't support this academy for recognition. I did it because I believe opportunity should never depend on where you're born. And tonight I want that belief to have a name." She announced the creation of a new scholarship program for children from foster care and orphanages across the country. It would cover tuition, housing, and mentoring. She named it the Miller Grant. Applause filled the hall, strong and unbroken. Frank felt tears slide down his face unashamed. Later, the headmaster offered Frank early retirement, full benefits, and a place of honor within the academy's history. Frank listened carefully, then shook his head with a small smile. "I'll stay," he said. "Someone has to take care of this place." Eleanor laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "You always were stubborn." As the night ended and the hall slowly emptied, Frank remained behind, pushing his cart across the polished floor. He glanced up once more at the portrait. This time, he didn't see a powerful benefactor or a symbol of success. He saw a little girl sitting on a windowsill, staring at the stars, keeping a promise she made long ago. And for the first time in years, Frank felt seen.